Whispering Pines seemed like a dream come true when I first drove through those ornate iron gates 3 months ago. The realtor had not exaggerated about the pristine streets, the manicured lawns, or the sense of security that the community offered. After years of apartment living in the city, I was ready for this change. The neighborhood stretched before me with its perfect rows of elegant homes, each one unique yet harmoniously designed to create a cohesive aesthetic that spoke of prosperity and care. My moving truck arrived on a Saturday morning. I had barely begun unloading when neighbors appeared with welcome baskets and offers of help. The Pattersons from across the street brought homemade cookies. The Johnsons from 2 doors down arrived with a bottle of wine and local restaurant recommendations. It felt like stepping into a movie scene of suburban bliss, complete with children riding bicycles and people walking their dogs along tree-lined sidewalks. That first week I received the community handbook, 120 pages of rules, regulations, and bylaws that governed everything from acceptable mailbox designs to approved exterior paint colors. The thickness of the document surprised me, but I understood the purpose. These rules preserved the beauty and value of the neighborhood. I skimmed through it, noting the sections about lawn maintenance, holiday decorations, and parking regulations. Nothing seemed unreasonable at first glance. I noticed her before we officially met. A woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair cut in an angular bob, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, measuring the height of the Miller's hedges with a tape measure. She made notes on a clipboard with practiced efficiency, her mouth set in a tight line of concentration. Later that day, I saw the Millers trimming those same hedges with frantic energy, stealing glances toward the street as they worked. "That is Karen Whitfield," Mrs. Patterson whispered to me over the fence as I unpacked my gardening tools in the backyard. "HOA president for 6 consecutive terms now, best to stay on her good side." There was something in her tone that made me pause, a warning delivered with nervous laughter that seemed out of place in this paradise. Other neighbors made similar comments in the following days, always with that same strange undercurrent of caution. "Just follow the rules exactly as written," advised Tom Johnson with a meaningful look. "Karen takes the HOA very seriously." "She has her interpretation of the bylaws," Mrs. Miller added when I complimented her newly trimmed hedges. "And her interpretation is the only one that matters." These cryptic warnings seemed excessive at the time. The community looked perfect, and a strict HOA president seemed a small price to pay for such beauty and order. I resolved to be a model resident. How difficult could it be to follow some basic rules? My brother Anthony called that weekend to check how I was settling in. He had helped me with the down payment on the house, insisting it was time I had some stability after years of moving for work. We discussed him visiting once I was fully unpacked. When my car started making strange noises that Sunday, he insisted on lending me his sedan while mine was in the shop. "It is nothing fancy," he said as he handed me the keys to his older model Toyota, "but it has sentimental value. That car got me through law school and my first years as an attorney." I parked the sedan in my driveway that evening, running my hand along its polished surface. Anthony had always taken immaculate care of his belongings. I had no way of knowing that this ordinary car would soon become the centerpiece of a neighborhood war. The first violation notice appeared on my door exactly 17 days after moving in. The stark white envelope stood out against the dark green paint, official and imposing. Inside was a printed form citing violation code 37B. Waste receptacles must not be visible from the street except between 5:00 a.m. and 7:00 p.m. on designated collection days. According to the notice, my garbage bin had remained visible until 11:43 p.m., 4 hours and 43 minutes beyond the allowed time. I remembered bringing the bin in late that night after returning from dinner with colleagues. It seemed like such a minor infraction that I expected a simple resolution. The next morning, I walked to the address listed as the HOA office, which turned out to be Karen Whitfield's home. Her garden featured exotic plants that seemed suspiciously similar to varieties listed as prohibited in the handbook. I rang the doorbell, envelope in hand and an apologetic smile ready. Karen opened the door wearing a tennis outfit despite the early hour. Her eyes assessed me coldly before recognition flickered across her features. "You are the new owner in 1427, she stated rather than asked. "I see you received your first violation notice." Yes, I wanted to apologize. Eyes for the oversight, I returned home late and— "We do not make exceptions," Karen interrupted, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness of saccharin. "Exceptions create precedents and precedents erode standards. There is a $50 fine for first violations. It will be added to your monthly assessment." Her dismissive tone caught me off guard. The bin was only out for a few extra hours. Could we perhaps consider a warning this time since I am new to the community? Karen's smile never reached her eyes. The rules apply equally to everyone, regardless of their tenure in Whispering Pines. That is why our community maintains its value while others decline. The fine stands. That afternoon, I encountered Tom Johnson while collecting my mail. He leaned over his fence with a sympathetic expression. "I saw Karen dropping by your house this morning. First violation notice." When I nodded, he sighed. "You have been selected as Karen's newest project. She does this every year with one newcomer, establishes her authority by making an example of them." "That seems unnecessarily hostile," I replied. "It is her way of maintaining control. Last year it was the Reynoldses, the year before the Garcias. Both families ended up selling and moving away. Karen likes to handpick her neighbors." This information troubled me, but I remained determined to adapt. I studied the handbook meticulously, setting calendar reminders for trash collection, lawn maintenance schedules, and seasonal decoration guidelines. Despite my efforts, the violation notices continued to arrive. My mailbox was cited for non-conforming design elements, though it matched every other mailbox on the street. My mulch was deemed the wrong shade of brown despite using the exact brand recommended in the handbook. When I planted flowers in my front garden, I received a violation for unapproved botanical selections, though they appeared on the approved plant list. Each time I attempted to address these issues with Karen, her responses grew increasingly curt. At the monthly HOA meeting, I raised questions about the seemingly subjective nature of some violations. The community center fell silent as Karen fixed me with a glacial stare. "The board has final interpretive authority on all bylaws," she announced to the room rather than to me directly. "This authority is granted in Article 3, Section 7 of our founding documents. If you find our standards too rigorous, perhaps Whispering Pines is not the right community for you." Several neighbors avoided eye contact as I took my seat. After the meeting, elderly Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm gently. "You have made yourself a target, dear. Karen does not like to be questioned publicly." "I was only asking for clarification," I protested. "It does not matter. She views questions as challenges to her authority. Be careful now. When Karen feels threatened, she escalates." That warning proved prophetic. The next day, I found Karen measuring the grass on my front lawn with a ruler. When she noticed me watching from my window, she looked directly at me and made a show of writing something on her clipboard. The violation notice came that afternoon, citing my lawn as 1/4 inch above regulation height, though I had mowed it just 2 days prior. What had started as merely annoying was transforming into something darker. Neighbors began to whisper warnings as they passed. "Do not get on her bad side." The atmosphere of paradise was shifting, revealing the power dynamics that governed life in Whispering Pines. I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake in moving here, never imagining that the situation was about to escalate beyond anything I could have anticipated. 3 weeks into Karen's campaign of enforcement, a water main broke beneath my driveway. The repair work would require breaking up the concrete and completely repaving the area, a process that would take approximately 5 days according to the contractors. This presented an immediate problem: where to park Anthony's car. The community rules were explicit about street parking. It was prohibited overnight under any circumstances. The only alternative was the visitor parking section near the community center, which required special permission for resident use. I submitted the proper paperwork to the HOA board, including photographs of the damaged driveway and the contractor's estimate. Janet, the HOA secretary, verbally approved my request while Karen was out of town, at a regional HOA leadership conference. Just make sure you move it back as soon as your driveway is usable again, Janet advised, and keep a copy of the approval with you just in case. The sedan itself was nothing particularly impressive, a 10-year-old Toyota Camry with modest mileage and impeccable maintenance. To most observers, it would appear completely ordinary. What made it special was its history. This was the car Anthony had driven to his first job as a public defender, the car that had carried him to countless court appearances as he built his reputation for fairness and integrity. Last month, that reputation had earned him an appointment to the district court bench, a position he had assumed with characteristic humility. The repairs to my driveway began on a Tuesday morning. I moved Anthony's car to the visitor section and placed the approval notice visibly on the dashboard as instructed. For 2 days, everything proceeded without incident. On the third day, Karen returned from her conference. I was working from my home office when I noticed her through the window. She stood beside Anthony's car, violation pad in hand, circling the vehicle with the predatory focus of someone who had found the perfect transgression. Her body language radiated righteous indignation as she photographed the car from multiple angles, ignoring the approval notice clearly visible on the dashboard. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Karen marched back to her own house, disappearing inside her garage. When she emerged moments later, my blood ran cold. In her right hand, she carried a hammer. I grabbed my phone and began recording, my hands trembling with disbelief as she approached the car with purposeful strides. Her first swing connected with the hood with a sickening thud that reverberated through the quiet afternoon. The second strike shattered the driver's side mirror, sending shards of glass cascading onto the pavement. The third blow dented the door panel deeply. "This will teach them about following rules," she muttered, loud enough that my phone captured her words clearly. "No special privileges in my community." Each impact was methodical, deliberate, not the chaotic destruction of momentary rage, but the calculated punishment of someone who believed absolutely in their right to enforce consequences. Her designer sunglasses reflected the afternoon sun as she moved around the vehicle, targeting different areas with precision. The side mirror, the headlight, the pristine paint job that Anthony had maintained so carefully, all fell victim to her hammer. When she finished her destruction, she tucked her violation pad under the windshield wiper with the satisfied posture of someone who had restored order to their domain. She returned the hammer to her garage before walking away with the confident strut of someone who believed they were untouchable. I stood frozen in my office, the phone still recording as she disappeared around the corner. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of shock and a strange, cold anger that felt nothing like the hot fury I expected. With steady hands that belied my internal turmoil, I saved the video and made copies to multiple devices and cloud storage accounts. Only then did I walk outside to retrieve the violation notice. "Unauthorized resident vehicle in visitor parking," it read. "Fine, $200, vehicle subject to towing at owner's expense within 24 hours. The handwritten note at the bottom sent chills down my spine. "We take violations very seriously in Whispering Pines. Consider this your final warning." There was no mention of the damage she had inflicted, no acknowledgement of the hammer in her hand. In her mind, the destruction was simply justified enforcement. I walked slowly around the car, documenting the damage from every angle. The shattered mirror, the dented hood, the deep gouges in the door panels that had stripped away paint to reveal the metal beneath. Each photograph captured not just physical damage but the breathtaking arrogance that had caused it. Back inside my house, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely used, Anthony's direct line at the courthouse. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the formal tone he adopted in his professional capacity. "Judge Reeves speaking." I took a deep breath, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. "Anthony, you will never believe what just happened to your car." Judge Anthony Reeves arrived at my house exactly 1 hour and 22 minutes after my call. He pulled into my neighbor's driveway in a county-issued vehicle, his expression betraying nothing of the conversation we had shared over the phone. Only the slight tightness around his eyes indicated his state of mind, as he approached me with the measured pace that had become his trademark in the courtroom. "Show me," was all he said. I led him to his damaged sedan, still parked in the visitor section where Karen had left her destructive signature. Anthony circled the vehicle slowly, his judicial calmness a sharp contrast to the violence evident in every dent and scratch. He ran his fingers along the gouges in the door panel, examined the shattered mirror, and tested the dented hood that now groaned when lifted. "You have video?" he asked finally. We returned to my living room, where I played the recording on my television screen. The footage was unmistakably clear, Karen's face fully visible, her actions deliberate, her muttered comments about teaching lessons perfectly audible. Anthony watched without comment, his silence more telling than any reaction could have been. When the video ended, he remained quiet for several long moments. "That is felony vandalism," he finally stated. "The damage easily exceeds the felony threshold. We have clear evidence of identity, intent, and action." Anthony had been my protector since our parents died in a car accident when I was 17 and he was 25. He had interrupted his law school studies to become my legal guardian, working nights to support us both while completing his degree. The sedan had been part of that chapter of our lives, purchased used but reliable. It had carried him to classes and night jobs, later to interviews and court appearances. When he was appointed to the bench last month, he had been issued a county vehicle for official use, making the sedan available to loan to me. "We could file charges immediately," Anthony noted, his legal mind already calculating the process. "But something tells me this behavior is part of a pattern." "According to the neighbors, she has been doing this for years," I confirmed. "Targeting newcomers, selectively enforcing rules, driving people away who question her authority." Anthony's expression shifted subtly. "Then perhaps a more comprehensive approach is warranted. Tell me about your neighbors, who might have similar experiences." That evening, we invited several neighbors for what appeared to be a casual cookout. The Pattersons came, along with the Johnsons, the Millers, and Janet from the HOA board, who arrived after ensuring Karen was occupied with her weekly tennis lesson. The gathering initially maintained the pretense of simple hospitality until Anthony gently steered the conversation. "I understand there have been some challenges with HOA leadership," he mentioned casually as he served drinks. "My sibling has shared some concerns." The floodgates opened. One by one, neighbors shared their stories: landscaping destroyed over minor violations, permits mysteriously denied for some while granted to Karen's friends for identical requests, selective enforcement that bordered on harassment. Janet, speaking in hushed tones despite being in my backyard, revealed that Karen had been instructing her to lose certain paperwork submitted by residents she disliked. "Like your parking approval," she admitted. "She told me this morning to remove it from the files. I have kept my own copies, but the official record now shows you never received permission." The pattern was clear. Karen wielded HOA rules like weapons against anyone who challenged her authority, while ignoring those same rules when they applied to her or her allies. My experience was not isolated. It was simply the latest in a long-established pattern of abuse. My brother remained quiet until everyone had spoken. When he finally stood, his presence commanded the attention of our small gathering without effort, the natural authority he carried not from his position but from his character. "The law works best," he said carefully, "when those who manipulate it are caught in their own web. What we need is not just evidence of one incident, but documentation of a pattern of behavior that demonstrates the systemic nature of the problem." We began formulating a plan that would require patience, documentation, and perfect adherence to every HOA bylaw, including those Karen herself regularly violated. Each neighbor was assigned specific tasks based on their strengths and access. Janet would provide copies of official documents showing discrepancies in enforcement. The Pattersons would photograph violations that Karen ignored at certain homes while penalizing at others. The Johnsons would compile a timeline of Karen's selective enforcement. "We will build a case so comprehensive that it cannot be dismissed as a personal vendetta," Anthony explained. "And when the time is right, We will present it in a forum where Karen cannot control the narrative. As our neighbors departed that evening, there was a new energy in their steps, the renewed hope of people who had lived too long under petty tyranny and finally glimpsed a path to justice. The damaged car that sat in visitor parking was no longer just a victim of vandalism. It had become a catalyst for change. The next 3 weeks transformed our quiet neighborhood into an intelligence-gathering operation that would have impressed federal agencies. Every resident who had suffered under Karen's reign contributed in their own way, united by a common purpose that transcended previous social barriers. Elderly Mrs. Patterson, who had rarely ventured beyond her garden before, now took daily walks with her smartphone, documenting violations that went unenforced at the homes of Karen's allies. Her meticulous photographs included timestamps and GPS coordinates, creating an irrefutable record of selective enforcement. The hedge heights at Karen's home consistently exceeded the maximum allowable measurement by 3 inches. Her exotic plants included varieties explicitly prohibited in the handbook. Her holiday decorations remained displayed 2 weeks beyond the removal deadline with no citations issued. The Johnsons focused on historical documentation, collecting copies of approved requests for home modifications that Karen had subsequently denied to others for identical projects. Their garage had become an archive of contradiction, a paper trail demonstrating how the rules bent for some while remaining rigid for others. My background in accounting proved unexpectedly valuable as Janet secretly provided copies of HOA financial records. I spent evenings poring over these documents, noting discrepancies that grew more troubling with each review. The landscaping contract had been awarded to a company owned by Karen's brother-in-law at a rate 40% above competing bids. The security system upgrade had been purchased from a firm where Karen's son worked as a sales manager. Maintenance fees had increased annually while services decreased, with no clear accounting for the difference. Karen noticed our suddenly unified community. The previously fragmented neighbors now gathered regularly for coffee, shared meals, and book club meetings that served as our planning sessions. Her suspicious nature could not ignore this shift in dynamics. The confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon as I pulled into my newly repaired driveway. Karen approached from across the street, her face set in lines of barely controlled anger. She cornered me before I could reach my front door, jabbing her finger into my chest with surprising force. "I know what you are doing," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "Turning my community against me, having little secret meetings, asking questions about HOA business that does not concern you." "I am just getting to know my neighbors," I replied calmly, aware of the recording app active on my phone in my pocket. "And as a homeowner, all HOA business concerns me." "Troublemakers find themselves very unwelcome in Whispering Pines," she countered, her finger jabbing harder with each word. "People who cannot adapt to our standards tend to discover that living here becomes uncomfortable. Sometimes their homes experience maintenance issues. Sometimes their mail gets misdelivered. Sometimes their pets escape. Unfortunate things happen to people who do not fit in." The thinly veiled threats were captured perfectly by my recording, adding another piece to our growing collection of evidence. The most damning information came from Robert, a town council member who lived 3 streets over. He shared confidentially that 3 previous homeowners had filed complaints about Karen's conduct with local authorities. Each case had mysteriously been withdrawn after private meetings with Karen. The pattern suggested settlements with non-disclosure agreements, Karen using HOA funds to silence her critics while maintaining her power. When I submitted formal requests for HOA board meeting minutes spanning the past 5 years, Karen made her first significant tactical error. Rather than providing the legally required documents, she sent an official HOA letter declaring certain records confidential due to ongoing community security concerns, a classification that existed nowhere in the bylaws and directly violated state HOA transparency laws. Anthony reviewed our assembled evidence with the practiced eye of someone who had spent his career evaluating legal cases. "There are multiple violations here," he observed. "Civil violations of HOA governance requirements, possible financial improprieties that would interest the state attorney general, and of course, the criminal matter of vandalism. "When do we present this?" I asked. "The quarterly HOA meeting is scheduled for Thursday evening," Janet informed us during our final planning session. "Karen always follows a strict agenda. When she opens the floor for new business, that will be our opportunity." "She will try to shut it down immediately," Mrs. Patterson warned. "She always does when someone raises uncomfortable questions." Anthony smiled slightly. "That is why timing and presentation are critical. We will need to establish our right to speak before she understands what is happening. Once the evidence begins to be presented, the other board members will not be able to ignore it without implicating themselves." As Thursday approached, we finalized our preparations. Documents were organized in labeled folders. Video evidence was edited for clarity and impact. Statements were prepared by those willing to speak publicly. The neighborhood hummed with nervous energy, the collective anticipation of people who had lived too long under petty tyranny and finally glimpsed a path to jus. Dies. The quarterly HOA meeting had record attendance that Thursday evening. The community center, usually populated by the same dozen residents who attended every meeting, was filled to capacity. Neighbors who had never participated in HOA governance arrived early to secure seats. Karen surveyed the unusual crowd with narrowed eyes as she arranged her materials at the front table, her suspicion evident in the tense set of her shoulders. The meeting began precisely at 7 o'clock. Karen opened with her usual efficiency, moving through the agenda items with practiced speed. Maintenance reports were summarized rather than read in full. Budget questions were deflected with promises of further review. Committee updates were abbreviated to their shortest possible form. Her strategy was obvious to those of us watching closely. She sensed trouble and was attempting to limit opportunities for disruption. When the floor finally opened for new business at 7:43, 17 minutes ahead of schedule, I raised my hand immediately. Karen's smile tightened as she recognized me, but HOA rules required she acknowledge my request to speak. Her gavel struck the table with unnecessary force. "The chair recognizes the resident of 1427 Magnolia Drive," she announced, her tone suggesting the granting of an unwelcome favor. "Please keep your comments brief as we have a full agenda tonight." I moved to the front with a folder of documents and my laptop, taking my time to arrange these materials on the podium. Karen's fingers drummed impatiently on the table as I connected my computer to the room's projector system. "Before I address my concern," I began calmly, "I want to introduce my brother who is visiting today." The distinguished man who rose from the back caused a ripple of whispers through the room. Anthony wore his courtroom suit, the subtle authority of his presence commanding attention without effort. Karen's expression faltered slightly as she assessed this unexpected development. "This is District Court Judge Anthony Reeves," I continued, watching recognition dawn in Karen's eyes, the first flicker of understanding about whose car she had vandalized. "He has kindly agreed to provide some legal context for the issues I am about to raise." Karen's hand reached for her gavel. "This is highly irregular. We do not allow outside legal counsel in board meetings without prior." "Point of order," Janet interrupted from her secretary position. "According to Bylaw 17.3, homeowners may invite professional consultants to provide context for their concerns at open meetings. I believe a judge qualifies as a professional consultant on matters of law." Karen's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, caught by the very rules she had so often wielded against others. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the power dynamics changing in real time. For the next 40 minutes, we presented our evidence methodically. I began with the documentation of selective enforcement, side-by-side photographs showing identical violations, treated differently depending on who committed them. The projection screen displayed dates, times, and addresses that created an undeniable pattern of favoritism and targeting. Janet provided official records showing discrepancies between approved minutes and actual decisions. The Johnsons presented their archive of contradictory rulings on home modification requests. Mrs. Patterson narrated her photographic evidence of Karen's own unaddressed violations with the confidence of someone finally speaking her full truth. With each new piece of evidence, Karen's attempts to interrupt grew more desperate. Her gavel struck repeatedly until Thomas, the vice president, gently removed it from her hand. "I believe we should hear them out," he said quietly, his expression troubled by the revelations unfolding before him. The financial documents caused the most visible reaction among the board members. The landscaping contracts with Karen's brother-in-law, the security system purchased from her son's employer, the unexplained transfers from the reserve fund labeled only as administrative expenses. These financial arrangements, Anthony noted from his position at the back of the room, could potentially trigger an investigation by the state attorney general if formally reported. Karen stood abruptly. "This is a coordinated attack on my character by residents who simply refuse to follow the rules. Their accusations are baseless and potentially slanderous." "That brings us to our final piece of evidence," I said, my voice steady despite Karen's glare. "This video was recorded 3 weeks ago in the visitor parking section." The room fell completely silent as the footage began to play on the large projection screen. Karen's face, clearly identifiable, filled the display, the hammer in her hand, the first blow against the hood of my brother's car, the shattery. NG of the side mirror. Her muttered comments about teaching lessons and following rules captured with perfect clarity by my phone's microphone. The sound of metal striking metal echoed through the community center's speakers. Several people gasped. One woman covered her mouth in shock. The board members stared in disbelief as their president methodically vandalized a vehicle on screen. When the video ended, Karen lunged toward my laptop. "That is an invasion of privacy. Illegal recording. That video was obtained without consent." Anthony spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of his position. "Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings, and activities conducted in public spaces carry no expectation of privacy under established case law." "That car was parked illegally," Karen screamed, her composure completely abandoned. "I was enforcing the rules." "That car had documented temporary permission to park there," Janet stated firmly, holding up her copy of the approval form. "And even if it had not, destruction of property is a felony in this state when the damage exceeds $500. Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I believe we need to address these allegations immediately. As vice president, I move that we temporarily suspend Karen from her duties pending a full investigation of these matters." The motion passed with only Karen's vote in opposition. As neighbors began discussing the need for a complete board audit, Karen stormed toward the exit, stopping to jab her finger toward me one last time. "You planned this, you set me up," she shouted, face flushed with rage. Anthony stepped forward slightly. "The only person responsible for the actions on that video is you, Mrs. Whitfield. Every consequence that follows comes from choices you made freely." The irony that she had been undone entirely by her own actions seemed completely lost on her as she pushed through the doors and disappeared into the night. The meeting continued for another hour as shell-shocked board members began the process of understanding the full scope of what had happened under their governance. A special election was scheduled to fill the presidency. An external audit was approved unanimously. As we walked to our cars afterward, neighbors approached to express their gratitude with handshakes, hugs, and invitations for coffee. The atmosphere had shifted palpably, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from the community, allowing everyone to stand taller in its absence. The following months brought significant changes to Whispering Pines. Karen faced criminal charges for vandalism and civil action for misappropriation of HOA funds. The investigation revealed years of selective enforcement and financial arrangements that had benefited her friends and family. Most neighbors were shocked by the extent of her misconduct, including several board members who had trusted her leadership. The new HOA president, retired attorney Mrs. Gonzalez, spearheaded a complete revision of enforcement procedures. The reform process required documentation and second opinions for violations, creating a system of checks and balances that prevented any single person from wielding excessive power. The community handbook was condensed from 120 pages to 35, focusing on necessary regulations rather than micromanagement. Anthony's car was repaired, the dents removed and paint restored to its original condition. He insisted, however, on leaving one small dent under the left headlight untouched. "Consider it a reminder of the price of ignoring injustice," he explained when I questioned his decision. "Sometimes we need visible reminders of where we have been to appreciate where we are." The most surprising development came from Thomas, the former vice president who had been Karen's strongest ally on the board. He appeared at my door one evening with a bottle of wine and an expression of profound discomfort. "I owe you an apology," he began as we sat on my front porch. "I should have seen what was happening. Karen manipulated information presented to the board for years. We only saw what she wanted us to see. That is no excuse, but I want you to know that many of us were deceived rather than complicit." These conversations happened throughout the neighborhood as people processed their role in allowing a petty tyrant to flourish in their midst. The healing was gradual but genuine, facilitated by new traditions that emerged in Karen's absence. Monthly neighbor potlucks replaced formal HOA meetings as the center of community life. A community garden bloomed on previously forbidden common ground. The culture shifted from confrontation to communication, from rigid enforcement to reasonable accommodation. 6 months after the hammer incident, I stood in my driveway watching children ride bicycles freely through the neighborhood, no longer constrained by Karen's arbitrary restraint. CTONs on noise-producing activities during certain hours. Lawn sprinklers created rainbows in the afternoon sun. Gardens displayed a variety of flowers that would have triggered violation notices in the previous regime. Anthony visited occasionally, always checking on our dent with a smile. During his most recent visit, he paused beside the car, running his fingers along the small imperfection that remained as our private memorial. "You know what I have learned from 20 years in law?" he asked rhetorically. "Justice rarely comes from grand gestures. Most often, it happens when ordinary people simply refuse to accept injustice as normal." I looked around at our transformed neighborhood. The perfect facades remained, but something more authentic now lived behind them, a genuine community built on respect rather than fear. My brother was right. The most important lessons from this experience had nothing to do with HOA regulations or property values. They were about the courage to stand together against those who abuse power, no matter how small the kingdom they rule.